Hello pot stickers. Today we're making tomato sauce. Well, I was out in my garden and the tomatoes are just starting to come in large quantities, and here you can see this big beautiful bowl of tomatoes that I've just harvested. And I have mostly San Marzano paste tomatoes, and this is what I'm going to use to make a tomato sauce. I have a few other of the slicing tomatoes that I'm not going to be using for anything else, so I'm just going to throw those in too. I'm going to use these to make an Italian style passata tomato sauce, and this is going to be done just by simply cooking these down in a pot until the juice starts to run. I'm going to drain off the tomato water. I use that water for other things like soups and stews. And I'm going to run this through a food mill to remove the skins and the seeds, and we will have the most amazing tomato sauce. I'm going to flavor it with just a little bit of fresh basil. So as you can see, some of these have blemishes on them, and that's perfectly fine. I'll just cut those parts out, and we can use all of these tomatoes to make our sauce with. What I have here is a big stock pot that I'm going to cook all the tomatoes in. I'm just going to take the tomatoes and just core them, take off any blemishes, any spots that don't look good, and I'm just going to cut those up into just big chunks and throw them right into the pot. So you can see, like, this one has some blemishes on it. I'm just going to cut out the blemish parts. That part will just go into the compost pile, and then this is just going to get chopped up in rough chops into the pot. These San Marzanos are just beautiful tomatoes. You can see I'm just going to cut those in half and throw them right into the pot. And I will go through all of these, removing the cores and filling my pot up. These are some really nice looking tomatoes. Nothing can beat a fresh garden tomato. Look at that. Look at that San Marzano. Lots of pulp in that, and delicious, delicious flavor. Beautiful tomatoes. Now I have these beautiful San Marzano tomatoes, but you could use any kind of tomato that you have growing in your garden to do this. Some might have a little bit more juice and water in it than others, but that's okay. If you drain off the water, you'll end up with a similar kind of sauce in the end. I'll show you how I drain it after I cook them. And I'm all done. You can see my pot is very full, but that's okay. This is going to cook down, and so I'm just going to cover this and set it right on the stove over a low to medium heat. I don't want it to cook too hard because you don't want the bottom to burn, so you do want to check this every now and then to make sure that it's not burning on the bottom. Starting to cook on the bottom. As this heats up, it'll all sort of sink down. You may be able to start to see some of that juice rising up in the pot. Okay, let's take a look. It's just coming up to the boil. You can see all of the water that's already come out of the tomatoes. I'm just going to stir this up, make sure the bottom is not sticking or burning, and I will cover this and let it cook only for about 10 minutes. I just want all the tomatoes to be softened so that they can be run through the food mill easily. Just cover that, and we'll leave it to simmer for about 10 minutes. It's been about 10 minutes. Let's check our tomatoes. Oh yeah, they have cooked nicely. Looks like they boiled up a little bit, but they are soft. Everything is soft and cooked. I don't want to mush them up too much at this point because I do want to drain the water off, the clear water. So what I'm going to do is turn off the heat and let this sit for a few minutes just to cool down before I process them. Okay, so I have my tomatoes cooked and they've softened, and what I want to do is remove the excess water so that I can puree just the pulp. So what I'm going to do first, I have a colander over a bowl, and I'm just going to place these tomatoes into the colander gently and let the water all drain through. And I'm going to do this in 2 batches. Gotta set this aside for a moment. Okay, what I want to do is just gently move these tomatoes around. I don't want the pulp to go through, I just want to drain off the water. So when most of that water has drained through, what you can see inside, I have this nice relatively clear water from the tomatoes. And this concentrates the flesh of the tomato so that you can get a sauce right away without hours and hours of cooking. And what I'm going to do is use my food mill. This is a food mill that I have. Actually, it's an old food mill. It's a single solid piece. And I find some of the newer food mills just don't work as well. So I just keep using this old one because it works really, really well for this. So what I'm going to do is take these tomatoes, put them into my food mill. I've been eyeing those Italian tomato mills that have the cylinder where the separates the seeds and the skins from the pulp, and they just run with a motor. I haven't bought one yet, but if I do more tomatoes, I think I might end up investing in one of those. Yeah, I haven't really needed it since I have my hand cranked food mill here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just run this through the food mill, back and forth. And forth, get all that tomato strained through my food mill. Okay, I can show you how it's coming out. Notice it's coming out as kind of a thick sauce. There's a little bit of water. We'll cook that down a little bit, but it's mostly like thick puree of a tomato sauce. You'll see I'm going back and forth. As the skins stop the bottom, and then the pulp doesn't go through anymore, so I just go backwards and scrape it off again and then continue in the forward motion. You can see that we're getting left with just the skins here. I'm just going to push some of this down to help get the last bits of it. I don't like to waste anything. Okay, you can see what's left when I'm done. It's pretty much dried skins and seeds. There's no tomato flesh left in there. So we're gonna scrape off the tomato sauce from the bottom, and then I'm gonna put this put the skins and seeds into my compost. Okay, you can see how nicely thick that sauce is after running through the food mill, and that's because we drained off all that water to begin with. So that is sauce that could be used right away. Okay, I'm going to continue with the other half of this and drain it. I mean, maybe I can just pour this right in here. See how clear that tomato water is? Gently move them around, let that water drain. And we'll add this right to our food mill for another round. Look at that beautiful pot of tomato sauce. No seeds, no skins, just beautiful tomato. Now, I want to show you how much water we had left over after draining it. Here's a big bowl. You can see that this is the tomato water, and there's quite a bit in here. Now, don't throw this away. This is perfectly delicious. I use this to cook beans in, or I will use it in soups and stews, or use it as a vegetable broth. It's got a nice tanginess because of the acidity of the tomatoes that lends itself well to a lot of different foods. So don't throw it away. You can put it into containers and freeze it, or you could even can it in a jar if you do water bath canning, just like you would a tomato sauce, but it's just the tomato water. In order to give this sauce just a little bit more flavor, I'm going to add a pinch of salt to it, not too much, You want to taste your tomatoes because the tomatoes also do have some natural salinity to it, but just a pinch of salt just to bring out the flavor. And then I have a large sprig of basil fresh from the garden, and I'm going to leave it whole on this sprig, and I just want to infuse that in there. I'm going to fish this out later. And so what I'm going to do is just simmer this down for about 15 minutes, let that basil infuse into the sauce. And there we have our beautiful tomato sauce. So let me put this on the stove and I'll simmer it for about 15 minutes. And here's the tomato sauce. Ooh, it looks really good. You can smell that basil infused into the sauce. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fish that basil out. And we will throw it away. It didn't get too cooked, so it's not like falling apart. Sometimes those basil leaves fall off, which is fine. They're good to eat, but they get a little slimy when they're cooked, so I don't really like the texture of basil leaves when they're cooked, but I sure like the flavor it infuses into this sauce. And there you have it. A simple, delicious tomato sauce from fresh garden tomatoes. Now you can use your tomato sauce just like this, or you could save it. It'll last for a week or so in the fridge if you want to use it within a week. Or if you want to preserve it longer, you could can it like I'm doing. I'm going to water bath can this. You could also put it in containers and store it in the freezer. Since my freezer space is a little bit limited, I prefer to actually can it so I can store it in my cellar without having to chill it. So what I have is I have some pint jars here that I've sanitized. They are hot and sanitized, and I have my tomato sauce, which I've just taken off the stove from simmering, and so it's nice and hot, so I'm hot packing these jars. Usually if I had just made the tomato sauce without seasoning it with anything, I would add some things to the jars, but I've already added salt and basil. What I do like to do, just to make sure that there's enough acidity in the jars for preservation, I do like to add a teaspoon of lemon juice to each of these jars, so I'm going to do that right now. And that'll just add a little bit more acidity and assurance that you have a product that will be safe preserving by water bath canning. So that's a teaspoon of lemon juice for each one. I would normally add a pinch of salt if I haven't already salted my tomato sauce. And you could add a basil leaf or two into these too, but I've already seasoned it, as I said, with basil. So I'm just gonna fill these jars. One of these funnels for canning works really well. I highly recommend them. And I'm just gonna fill it up just until it's about maybe a ½ an inch from the top. Now all the way to the top. You need a little bit of airspace at the top so that it doesn't come out of the top of the, ooh, that one's a little bit full. I might just take a little bit of sauce out of that one. That's about where I like it. Now I have 9 pint jars here. If I don't use it all, I'll use the rest of the sauce that I don't can soon. But I think I might get close to 9 pints. Oops, I spilled that on the outside. We'll wipe these off before I put them in the canner. Looks like I might get 8 pints out of this batch of sauce. And that will be just about perfect. Let me get another spoon here. Perfect, just about 8 pints. Now what I'm going to do is wipe these rims really carefully, make sure they're good and clean so that the lid will seal perfectly on them. If you have any food bits on there, then it will prevent that lid from sealing. Get all that tomato off that I spilled. And I have these lids that they don't need to be sterilized, but they are washed and clean. And We'll put the rings on, and you just want them finger tight. You don't want them too tight, because what happens when you process these is you want the air to escape, and then you want it to seal and create a vacuum when it cools back down. So if you put these too tight, you just want them nudged finger tight. If you put them too tight, then they might have a problem actually releasing the air that's inside and creating that vacuum to make a good seal. Okay, so there are my 8 pints of freshly made passata tomato sauce, and I'm gonna put these into my water bath canner and process them for 25 minutes. Okay, I have my water bath canning pot filled about 2/3 of the way, and the water is boiling, and I am going to carefully place these pints gently into the water. Now, if I just put the first 1 or 2 in, you're just gonna see it doesn't cover the top, but when you get all of them in, hopefully that water will cover the top, and you want the water to be at least a good inch over the top at least. Yep, see the water came up really nicely over the top. If there's not enough water in there when you have all of your jars in, you can always add a little bit of water. And if it doesn't boil right away when you have the jars in there, you want to start counting your time from when it comes back up to the boil. So you can see my water is boiling nicely. I am going to start my timer for 25 minutes, cover this, and let it process. Okay, these have been processing for 25 minutes, and they should be ready. I'm going to turn off the heat, and I'm going to transfer these over onto a clean towel and let them slowly cool down. Now when these cool, the vacuum will pull the lid down and cause them to seal. You might hear them starting to pop as they start to cool after I've taken them out of the hot water bath. And if they stay down and don't pop back up, when they're fully cooled, then they've sealed well. Yep, there goes another one. Thank you for watching, and join me next time as the pot thickens.